In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mat, M.D. Picture yourself walking down a street that feels like it belongs to another world. Forget the white picket fences and kids playing hopscotch. Instead, imagine raw human desperation spilling onto every corner. You see people, young and old, locked in what looks almost like a haunted waltz. Their bodies frail, their eyes searching for something, anything, to silence the chaos screaming inside them. This isn't some far-off war zone. This is Vancouver's downtown Eastside, right here in Canada, where Dr. Gabor Mat spent years working as a physician among the forgotten. For decades, Dr. Mat worked with people society had written off with a single cruel word: junkies. These were folks wrestling with brutal addictions to heroin, cocaine, crystal meth, you name it. But something shifted for him after listening to hundreds of heartbreaking stories so painful they'd make you want to look away. He started seeing something the rest of us miss. Addiction wasn't about people making dumb choices or lacking moral fiber. It wasn't even really about the drugs. Addiction, he discovered, was actually a desperate escape route from unbearable pain. It was the language of people whose childhoods had been marked by trauma, neglect, and a devastating absence of love. His book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts exploded onto the scene, becoming a national bestseller across Canada and getting translated into language after language. Why? Because it doesn't just share the raw, no-holds-barred stories of his patients. It brilliantly weaves together cutting-edge brain science, deep psychological insights, and the kind of human compassion that makes you rethink everything. And here's what makes Dr. Mat's perspective so unique. He's a Holocaust survivor himself, and he openly talks about his own battles with compulsive behaviors. This isn't some detached academic studying addiction from an ivory tower. This is someone who gets it, who feels it in his bones. Here's his radical argument. Addiction's roots burrow deep into our earliest experiences, literally reshaping how our brains develop in ways scientists are only starting to understand. So let me ask you this. What if by the time we're done here today, you saw addiction through completely different eyes? Not as some failure of willpower, but as this intricate dance between personal history, brain chemistry, and the world we navigate every day. Here's the kicker. You might find that the struggles of someone living on the streets echo the compulsions lurking in your own life, whether it's with food, shopping, work, or that phone you can't seem to put down. Buckle up, because this journey into the realm of hungry ghosts just might transform how you see the world, and yeah, maybe even how you see yourself. Let's start with that haunting title, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Where did Dr. Mat dig that up? He borrowed it from Buddhist teachings, specifically the Wheel of Life, which maps out 6 realms of human existence. One of these is the hungry ghost realm, and the image is both vivid and disturbing. Picture these creatures, with mouths like pinpricks, throats like drinking straws, but bellies grotesquely swollen and achingly empty. They're trapped in an endless cycle of craving, always reaching for something outside themselves to fill this bottomless void, this gnawing ache that never lets up. But here's the tragedy. Whatever they grab, whether it's drugs, alcohol, a shopping binge, or endless hours glued to screens, it never satisfies them. It can't. Because what they're really hungry for isn't something they can swallow or inject. They haunt their own existence, never quite present, driven by an emptiness they can't even name. This, Dr. Mat argues, is addiction's true territory. And it's not just about illegal drugs. It's a fundamental human pattern. He sees one core addiction process running through everything, whether it's the life or death dependencies of his downtown Eastside patients, or the person who can't stop eating, the shopaholic, the gambler, the sex addict, or even the workaholic everyone applauds at the office. Those we dismiss as junkies aren't wired differently from the rest of us, he insists. They're just stuck at the extreme end of a spectrum, where many of us find ourselves somewhere along the line. He doesn't exclude himself either, candidly sharing his own compulsive shopping for classical music albums, dropping thousands of dollars, hiding purchases from his wife, experiencing the same cycle of craving, brief relief, and crushing shame his patients describe with heroin. So here's the game-changing question. It's not, why the addiction, but rather, why the pain? Addiction, Dr. Mat repeats like a mantra throughout the book, always originates in pain, whether you're consciously aware of it or it's buried somewhere deep in your unconscious. It functions as emotional anesthesia. Drugs like heroin and cocaine are powerful physical painkillers, sure, but they're also numbing psychological agony. Think about this. Research shows that the exact same brain regions that light up when you stub your toe also activate when you experience emotional rejection or social exclusion. When someone says they feel emotionally hurt, they're not being poetic. They're being scientifically accurate. And the lives of people caught in severe addiction? They're almost universally marked by overwhelming amounts of pain, especially during childhood. Dr. Mat shares stories that'll break your heart. Horrific abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, neglect that defies comprehension, abandonment, humiliation, witnessing violence, having to parent their own addicted or unstable parents while they were still kids themselves. One man remembered his mother stuffing him in a clothes dryer as a toddler to keep him safe while she went out drinking. Serena, a young indigenous woman, came to Vancouver searching for the mother who'd abandoned her at birth, only to have that mother introduce her to heroin and then sell her body while she slept. These aren't rare exceptions. They're tragically common among the severely addicted. This early trauma isn't just a sad backstory you can file away. It fundamentally rewires the developing brain. Dr. Mat dives deep into neuroscience here, explaining that our brains, especially during those first few years of life, are incredibly malleable, literally sculpted by our experiences. He calls this experience-dependent brain development. Here's an analogy. Unlike a horse that can run hours after birth, human babies arrive with remarkably immature brains. About 3/4 of our brain development happens outside the womb, mostly in those early years. This makes us incredibly adaptable, which is great, but also incredibly vulnerable to our environment, which is terrifying. What does a developing brain need to thrive? 3 essentials: nutrition, physical security, and consistent emotional nurturing. In our society, it's often that emotional nurturing that gets disrupted, especially when parents are stressed, depressed, distracted, or wrestling with their own unresolved trauma. This emotional connection, what psychiatrists call attachment, isn't just a nice bonus. It's absolutely crucial for wiring the brain circuits responsible for managing stress, regulating emotions, experiencing reward, and making healthy decisions. Dr. Daniel Siegel captured it perfectly. Human connections create neuronal connections. When that secure attachment goes missing, or worse, when the environment becomes frightening or chaotic, the brain adapts for survival but not for thriving. Key brain systems get knocked out of balance. The opioid system. This involves your brain's natural painkillers, endorphins. They're crucial for experiencing love, connection, pleasure, and soothing both physical and emotional pain. Remember that patient who described her first heroin hit as feeling like a warm, soft hug? That's what this system provides naturally. Early stress or lack of nurturing touch can sabotage this system's development, leaving someone less able to self-soothe or feel genuine connection, making external opioids incredibly seductive. The dopamine system, this is your brain's motivation and incentive engine. Dopamine makes you want things, drives you to seek them out, makes you feel energized and alive. It kicks in for survival basics like food and sex, but also for cues associated with reward, like spotting that candy bar you loved last time. Addictive drugs trigger massive dopamine floods, way beyond anything natural. Chronic drug use actually reduces the number of dopamine receptors in your brain, making everyday life feel flat and gray, creating even stronger cravings just to feel normal. Here's the kicker. Research suggests early stress can lead to fewer dopamine receptors even before drug use begins, creating biological vulnerability from the start. The prefrontal cortex, especially the orbitofrontal cortex, this is your brain's executive office, responsible for impulse control, decision-making, weighing long-term consequences, reading social cues, and regulating emotions. This area develops significantly after birth and depends heavily on attuned parenting. Trauma and chronic stress impair its development and function. In people with addiction, this area often shows reduced activity, leading to poor impulse control and difficulty choosing long-term well-being over immediate relief. It also becomes hypersensitive to drug-related cues, driving cravings. This is the biological reason behind what Mat's patient Dawn brilliantly described as feeling like a child not released. Stress weaves through everything. Early life stress literally primes your brain to overreact to stress throughout your entire life. This heightened stress response makes the soothing effects of drugs even more irresistible. Plus, stress itself becomes a major trigger for cravings and relapse. Uncertainty, lack of control, conflict, isolation. These are potent stressors. And here's the cruel irony. These are exactly the conditions society and the war on drugs impose on people struggling with addiction. This understanding demolishes the idea that drugs cause addiction. Dr. Mat points to fascinating studies, like the Vietnam War veterans. Many used heroin heavily while deployed in that stressful, traumatic environment, but 95% stopped when they came home. Same drug, different environment, and internal state. He also highlights Dr. Bruce Alexander's brilliant rat park experiments. Rats in cramped, isolated cages compulsively self-administered morphine, but rats living in spacious, stimulating social environments. The rat park largely ignored the drug, even when physically dependent. The takeaway? It's not the drug itself, but the cage, the environment, and that internal state of distress and disconnection that creates vulnerability. Addiction emerges when a susceptible person, often due to early adversity, encounters a potentially addictive substance or behavior in a stressful context. Dr. Mat also pushes back hard against purely genetic explanations. While acknowledging genetics might play some role, influencing temperament or sensitivity, he argues the overwhelming emphasis on genes conveniently ignores the massive impact of environment, especially early environment, on how genes actually express themselves. That's epigenetics. He critiques twin and adoption studies, pointing out they often fail to account for the shared prenatal environment and the significant stress of adoption itself. Believing addiction is all in the genes, he suggests, lets society off the hook for addressing the difficult environmental factors: poverty, inequality, lack of parental support, historical trauma, especially for indigenous populations. This naturally leads to his scathing critique of the war on drugs. He sees it as a catastrophic failure built on a fundamental misunderstanding of addiction. It punishes people for coping mechanisms they developed in response to suffering. It criminalizes the vulnerable. packs prisons disproportionately with minorities, fuels violent black markets that profit wildly from illegality, creates more stress and trauma for users which hinders recovery, and diverts massive resources away from addressing root causes and providing real help. It treats a health issue rooted in pain as a moral or criminal problem. Instead, Dr. Mat champions a compassionate, science-based approach centered on harm reduction. Harm reduction accepts that abstinence isn't always immediately achievable for severely addicted individuals and focuses on minimizing the negative consequences of drug use for both the person and society. This includes practices like needle exchanges, preventing the spread of infections like HIV and hepatitis C. Methadone maintenance, a legal oral opioid that prevents withdrawal and reduces heroin cravings, helping people stabilize their lives. Supervised injection sites like Vancouver's Eastside, safe places where users can inject pre-obtained drugs in a clean environment with medical supervision, preventing overdose deaths, reducing public drug use, and connecting users to health services. Studies prove these sites save lives and money, and don't increase crime or drug use, potentially even prescribed heroin. For the small percentage for whom methadone doesn't work, studies in Switzerland and the UK show that providing pharmaceutical-grade heroin under medical supervision drastically reduces crime, improves health, and helps social reintegration. Harm reduction, Mat argues, isn't about condoning drug use. It's about meeting people where they actually are with compassion, reducing immediate suffering, saving lives, and building trust, which is often the first step towards any recovery. It's about recognizing the humanity in the person struggling with addiction. But harm reduction is only part of healing. True recovery requires addressing the underlying pain and those dysfunctional brain patterns. Dr. Mat emphasizes moving beyond mere abstinence, just stopping the behavior, towards genuine sobriety, a state of conscious awareness and intentional living. This involves cultivating what he beautifully calls compassionate curiosity towards yourself, instead of harsh self-judgment like, "Why did I relapse again? I'm so pathetic," you ask gently. I wonder what pain or stress pulled me back to that old coping mechanism. Understanding the function the addiction served as painkiller, stress reliever, substitute for connection, becomes key to letting it go. He draws on mindfulness practices, echoing Buddhist traditions, emphasizing bare attention, observing your thoughts, feelings, and cravings without automatically identifying with them or acting on them. This creates space, a precious moment of choice, between impulse and action. He adapts Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz's 4 Steps method, originally developed for obsessive-compulsive disorder. 1. Relabel. Recognize the addictive urge not as a genuine need, but as a deceptive message from faulty brain wiring. This isn't me, it's the addiction talking. 2. Reattribute. Understand the urge stems from those brain changes caused by past experiences and drug use, not from personal failure. 3. Refocus. Deliberately shift your attention to a different, healthier, constructive activity, even just for 15 minutes, breaking the automatic link between urge and action. 4. Revalue. Clearly remind yourself of the negative consequences of the addiction and the true value of sobriety and a life aligned with your deeper principles. To these 4, Mat adds a crucial 5th step: recreate. Actively envision and choose the life you actually want, aligned with your values, passions, and desire for connection, rather than being controlled by past programming. Healing also demands addressing the external environment. This means actively reducing stress, learning to assert your needs in healthy ways, and finding supportive communities, like 12-step groups for many, where you experience belonging and purpose. For loved ones of people with addiction, it means understanding you cannot fix the addict, but you can offer support without judgment, set healthy boundaries for yourself, and perhaps do your own work to understand the family dynamics involved. Ultimately, Dr. Mat frames addiction and recovery in spiritual terms, though not necessarily religious. The poverty Jesus spoke of, he suggests, is the loss of connection to our essential selves, to our inherent worth, to our oneness with life itself. Addiction becomes a misguided quest to fill that spiritual void with external things that can never truly satisfy. Healing, then, becomes a journey back home to yourself, a reclaiming of your full humanity. It's about finding meaning beyond the ego's endless demands, often through service, creativity, or connection to something larger than yourself. It's acknowledging the pain without letting it define you, and discovering, as the poet Edmund Spenser wrote, that there is nothing lost but may be found if sought. The book doesn't wrap up with tidy solutions. Instead, it leaves you with a profound sense of the resilience of the human spirit, even when submerged in unimaginable suffering. It throws down a challenge. Look at those struggling with addiction not with judgment or fear, but with compassion, recognizing the shared humanity and the deep pain that often hides beneath the surface. Reading In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts feels less like consuming information and more like being emotionally transformed. It dismantles so many assumptions we carry around about addiction, choice, and responsibility. Dr. Gabor Mat doesn't just lay out scientific data. He pulls you into the raw, painful, and surprisingly relatable world of his patients, forcing you to confront the suffering that fuels addiction. His central message, that addiction isn't a choice or moral failing, but a response to deep pain, often rooted in childhood trauma and scrambled brain development, feels profoundly important, maybe even urgent. It shifts blame away from the individual and illuminates this complex web of biological, psychological, and social forces. What hit me hardest was the universality he reveals. By sharing his own struggles with compulsive shopping and workaholism, he shatters the wall between us and them. He shows us that the hungry ghost, that gnawing sense of inner emptiness, that craving for something external to complete us or numb our discomfort, lives inside many of us navigating our modern, stressed-out, often isolated world. Whether it's drugs, food, shopping, work, technology, or chasing validation, we all develop strategies to escape the present moment or fill a perceived void. The difference often comes down to degree and consequence, shaped by the intensity of our early experiences and the resources we had access to. This perspective doesn't excuse harmful actions, but it opens the door to compassion. It urges us to ask, why the pain, before rushing to condemn. It shines a harsh light on the spectacular failure and cruelty of the war on drugs, which punishes the most vulnerable victims of trauma and societal breakdown, while conveniently ignoring root causes. His advocacy for harm reduction isn't about throwing in the towel. It's about meeting people where they actually are with practical care, reducing immediate harm, and creating the safety and trust that might, just might, make healing possible down the road. So how can we actually apply these powerful lessons starting right now? First, practice compassionate curiosity with yourself. Next time you find yourself reaching for that extra snack, endlessly scrolling or snapping at someone, just pause for a second. Instead of beating yourself up, gently ask, what feeling am I trying to avoid or soothe right now? What need isn't being met? Just noticing without the harsh judgment is a surprisingly powerful starting point. Second, try a moment of mindful awareness. Pick one small, automatic thing you do today, maybe checking your phone or grabbing coffee. Before you do it, just observe the impulse. Notice the feeling in your body, the thought popping up. You don't have to stop yourself, just become aware of the automatic pilot for a few seconds. This builds the capacity for conscious choice. Third, challenge your judgmental thinking about others. When you see someone struggling, whether with addiction or anything else, try looking past the behavior. Consider the potential pain or history driving it. This doesn't mean excusing harm, but it shifts your internal stance from condemnation toward understanding, toward empathy. In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts reaches beyond addiction. It's a book about being human, about suffering, and about the possibility of healing. It reminds us that connection, compassion, and self-awareness aren't just feel-good concepts. They're essential ingredients for both individual and collective well-being. It offers a vision where understanding replaces blame, and where healing starts with acknowledging the pain, both in others and within ourselves. That was a summary of In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mat. We've covered some seriously deep ground today: the roots of pain, brain science, and the surprising resilience people carry. But honestly, this kind of summary only scratches the surface. The real power lives in immersing yourself in the stories, wrestling with the science, and letting Dr. Mate's compassionate wisdom sink deep. This summary is like a map showing the landscape, but reading the book, that's taking the journey yourself. If any of these ideas resonated with you, if you're curious to understand addiction, or really just human suffering, on a deeper level, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. It's the kind of book that doesn't just inform you, it stays with you, potentially shifting how you see the people around you, and maybe even how you see yourself. You'll find a link to the book down in the description. And if this exploration added something to your day, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to Billionaire's Bookshelf. We explore transformative books like this regularly, and subscribing means you won't miss the next deep dive. Let's keep learning and growing together.